And there we have it. The Belgian Grand Prix crowned Max Verstappen the victor despite a gearbox grid penalty, followed home by teammate Sergio Perez and Charles Leclerc in third in his Ferrari. Throw in Saturday's sprint race, confusing tyre calls and some DNFs for Sainz and Piastri. Lots to discuss today. I'm Martyn Lee from the Autosport podcast. Joining me are Matt Kew live from Spa Francorchamps and Jake Boxall-Legge back here because he had some of his old haunt Formula E to look after this weekend as well. Matt, we'll start with you. Quickly on yesterday, actually, and the sprint and a debate which ensued regarding wet tyres afterwards as well, because we saw them trundle around after the safety car and then all the pit on the first lap or second lap and go on to Inters, that heavy rain delay, which is the right thing to do. We shouldn't go racing if it's unsafe. But I think George Russell, one of those leading the calls from the drivers to say it's pointless if we can't race a tyre. And it looks like Pirelli almost agreed. Should we just bring Inters to the races and not run if we can't clear the water? Or is it just something specific about this track and being sensitive to some of the terrible news we've had coming out of this track in recent years?
Yeah, George Russell saying we've made no progress since Fuji 2007 from George Russell, who famously wasn't in that race, but never mind. I think, it's dictated by safety. So, send them out on group wet tyres to clear as much water as possible to improve visibility, which is, obviously in reference to the fatal accidents that have happened here. So that works in that respect. No one's going to deny that safety is a good move there, and visibility. We're testing these inadequate spray guards that seem to have completely neglected that in a ground effect area, everything's shifted underneath, so you've got all the water coming out the diffuser. But by doing that, you're then, like you say, running into the crossover period for intermediate tyres. So actually, Mario Isola, fair play, boss of Formula One, boss of Pirelli, said, the drivers are right when we say these full wets are useless now. But it's not because the application, they might not grip all the time, they might be prone to aquaplaning, whatever, but it's the way they're being used is literally to run behind a safety car and then switch straight to the intermediate tyre. So the solution is either develop spray guards to improve visibility and run on the full wets, or basically develop a super intermediate tyre, he called, that will span the crossover. What I would say, without going too far down that route, is that would help in the racing, but then presumably you'd lose what you gain in qualifying, because if the super intermediate tyre is like half a full wet to dry period, then that half a full wet sort of tyre zone, you would lose delaying qualifying until enough water is or until the rain had eased enough so you could run that, if that makes sense. So an imperfect solution. Pirelli reckons they could have something going by the middle of next season. And I would suggest they might be much more motivated to do that if they win the tyre tender for 2025. If not, then business as usual, perhaps.
JBL, you're our technical expert, but also you've covered many series over the years for us at Autosport, and you're a fan of many motor racing series as well, whether it's open wheel or not. You also saw that the F1 spray guard, mud guard, whatever it was, test that they did, it wasn't a great start. It didn't look like it made any difference at all. But is this a problem unique to Formula One? What do you think of that test that they're doing, that solution they were offering, and perhaps what they could perhaps learn from elsewhere? Or are we stuck with this problem?
I don't think it's particularly unique to just Formula One, because it's something that spans all single-seater championships. The thing is, what you're trying to do is defy physics almost in a way, because you've got this situation where, as Matt said, you've got this underbody of the car now where you've got this air rushing through, and the reason for that is to build downforce. And so to kind of stop that with any device behind that or anything like that, you're interrupting the aerodynamics, and that's not something that teams want to happen at all. It's probably true that it's a little bit less bad in, say, sports car racing, because you do have these covered wheel arches and these greater structures kind of behind the car. And then in, World Rally, you don't have that problem at all because you don't have cars following each other. So I think it's kind of a mix of a lot of different things. And I think Max Verstappen put it actually quite personally in, you can't really change the visibility with what we have now. So the option is you persist with it, or you just don't race in wet conditions. I feel like it is a problem that it's either got worse in recent years, or it's just become something that people are a lot more wary of, or perhaps a little bit of the two. But equally, it is true that the less airflow rushing from underneath the car, the less spray you get. That's just kind of how it works. With these wet tyres, they're supposed to displace a lot of water, And that's great when you're going further into the race so that you're getting a dry track much sooner. You still have to disperse that water, and that's where the spray is. And so it's a bit of a catch-22 when you can't really develop a wet tyre that doesn't produce the spray because it's just keeping the water on the track. And so it's a real issue that there is no real simple answer to. And it does seem that the experiments of putting a thing behind the car wheels just hasn't really done a whole lot at all. So it's early days. I think FIA head of single-seater Nico Tombastis put it, but it's hard to think of what the situation, or what the solution rather, actually is.
Okay, well, let's get on to talking about a little mention of yesterday's sprint race where Oscar Piastri did so well to come home second, leading a Formula One race, thanks for the first time in his rookie season in a McLaren. I know you wouldn't have put money on that. Thanks to the pit stop timing, really, inevitably overhauled by Verstappen yesterday in the sprint. I thought he drove brilliantly to come home second. Today, impossible to say because he was a DNF, but Norris struggled at times, particularly being 12 miles an hour or 20 kph down on the straights, making Norris a sitting duck at times. After consecutive podiums, Matt, why did McLaren shine yesterday in the wet and struggle today?
Setup is the short answer. So for this weekend, they focused on copying Red Bull. So as we mentioned on last week's video and podcast, that they've got aggressive, bigger rear wing, so they can fit that with a lower drag beam wing, so straight line efficiency, but get a more powerful DRS effect, which is what Red Bull have been doing. And by the way, their reaction to McLaren doing that is, oh my God, Formula One's full of world-class engineers. How on earth is it taking them 18 months to work out what doing and catch up? But that's an aside. That was better suited for the wet, but isn't well suited to Spa and the dry. And McLaren, okay, they've been a bit like the boy who cried wolf, going, oh, we expect to be rubbish this weekend and got podiums. But they were sort of, they go, right, we've focused everything on developing our car, upgrading our car, and look what that's given us, 2 podiums. And if the trade-off is that we can, in that time, in that resource, bring a Spa-specific rear wing as well, then so be it. We made the most of it on the sprint race, and now we understand that we definitely got to have one for Monza. So not like panic stations. It's not even like a reality check or McLaren actually settling down into 4th place. It's just they didn't have the part they needed, but that's okay because they planned not to have the part they needed.
JBL, on to the race itself. I've mentioned it already, that collision between Piastri and Carlos Sainz, with Carlos saying Oscar's move was optimistic. Yeah, he kind of got a little wheel down the side, but then got pincered into the barrier. And compare that to yesterday's sprint, which was only 11 laps, and they made the sprints to give us action. So Mercedes and Red Bull gave us some action, and then we had one of the drivers being penalised by 5 seconds and given penalty points on his licence for just about the only bit of action in yesterday's sprint. How did you read that first corner collision, though, between Piastri and Sainz? Because the stewards today said, oh yeah, that's absolutely fine. I didn't even call it a first lap kind of incident, or maybe they don't define it really, do they, JBL? But they just say, yeah, no further action. How did you read that? Was Piastri predominantly to blame for that one?
I think it was 6 of one and half dozen of the other, to be honest, because Sainz was in the situation where he'd locked up and he was trying to avoid the car in front, that being Hamilton, and so he pulled over to the right-hand side of the corner. Piastri was trying to thread his McLaren down the inside and try and make up a couple of positions. But Sainz did, said more experienced drivers perhaps know not to put their car there. And it's hard to disagree with that point of view because you put your car in the middle of the source and try to get the apex for it. But everybody's coming from out wide. That's always the way that the races start. So you're opening yourself up to a lot of danger there, and it's hard to kind of think of, I can think of a few instances in the past where people have put their car down the inside and, their race has either been over or they've been facing the wrong way and had to make up positions, that kind of thing. So it's kind of hard to disagree with both. I do think that Sainz possibly could have left him a little bit more room, and it was, largely his mistake that his lockup rather, that led to that. So I don't want typical armchair commentator, not quite. I just don't really want to blame either driver for it because I don't think either driver is to blame.
We'll get on to the Red Bulls in just a second, that coming home 1-2, and actually the Alpines as well in a second, Matt. But let me ask you about that battle for the final place on the podium. Charles Leclerc got third for Ferrari and seemed to have the measure of both Perez, or rather Perez had the measure of him, because Leclerc couldn't close that gap to Perez in second. But equally, he also was able to hold off Hamilton. It was not the most interesting race. It was a really interesting one to watch today from sort of fourth, fifth place downwards. There were some fantastic battles, but if you were just watching the top four, pretty boring because nobody really did anything. No one made a move. Hamilton didn't try a contra strategy of, pitting with 18, 20 laps to go onto the softs and just do, 18 quali laps and see if he could, force Leclerc into something or get the final place. What do you think of that about Ferrari's pace and Mercedes' pace today, which I found very hard to read into because it all seemed to be quite sort of on a level, really, and not really much for me to read into. But what can you tell us about what you saw today?
Yeah, the first point I think about the Grand Prix as a whole is that, like we've seen a few times this season, there's lots of overtakes, but not a lot of racing. I think that's where, we're looking at between an interesting race and a pretty dull one. And I think this was in the latter camp. Mercedes and Ferrari, there's cause for optimism in the sense that it was a solid race, good execution. Okay, Mercedes had a bit of bouncing, but so did a few teams. No massive disasters. But I think it's bigger picture stuff once again with those two teams because, first of all, it is now a year and 20 days since Ferrari last won a race. And if it wasn't for, Russell in Brazil, no team has won apart from Red Bull. But you wind back to this race last year and the positions and the intervals are identical between, Red Bull, gap to Ferrari, gap to Mercedes. In fact, the only thing that's really different in the top five is now that Alonso wears green instead of the blue he was wearing last year. So I think it's that bigger picture that Ferrari think they bought a more settled car. They think they manage their tyres better than previous races, but it's not completely fixed. And obviously, Mercedes still have this performance gap relative to Red Bull, and that's fine in isolation. But then, we're a year down a line. Neither of them have made inroads on Red Bull, and then you can argue whether the cost cap is because of the cost cap, because of this set of rules, and Red Bull's better understanding about how long are we going to be fixed in this place before. And then you've got Red Bull with the ATR turning their attention to 2024. Ferrari and Mercedes going, well, we haven't closed the gap to Red Bull. Let's look to 2024. So almost this sort of ever slightly underwhelming feeling that we'll pick up in Monza. Zandvoort first race back in a similar situation. The only thing I might say is that Aston Martin should expect to be a bit more competitive for, I'll say reasons for now, in case Lawrence Stroll sets his dogs on me, but their drop-off in performance in the paddock is now more understood. They've had to change a part on their car to be compliant, and that set them back, but they think they've understood that here in Spa, so they expect to be sort of slightly more competitive going forward. But out of that, then it's still, back to where we were. Mercedes, Ferrari, Aston Martin, make your mind up, and maybe McLaren, make your mind up who's second. No one's getting near Red Bull.
Well, let's talk Alpine then. Third yesterday, eighth today, but parting ways with Otmar Safnauer and Alain Permain there. 34, 35 years with that squad. A huge amount of experience they're losing. JBL, it's not like football when a new manager comes in and all the players are worried about their starting 11 position, so they give 5% more. It's not like the Renault power unit thinks, I better give a bit extra up the hill today. It's not the way that engineering works, and the team give their best every weekend as well. But what caused Alpine to have a good result, and what about a big shake-up midway through the season? That's going to be really unstabling for the team. No news, as far as I know, on a new team going in to there, losing so much experience, but what they need to do in the second half of the season. I
can't believe you're disregarding the new manager bounce of the powertrains, Martin. It's a technical phenomenon everybody knows about.
I'm so sorry. I'm sorry.
Honestly, I think P3 did come as a bit of a surprise, and it was largely a very well-timed pit stop that got Pierre Gasly into that position. He'd qualified well for the sprint, but to retain P3, that was a really strong result, and it's just what they needed. He had a less fortuitous time in Sunday's Grand Prix. He did spend, I think, most of the first half, if not beyond, ahead of Esteban Ocon, but it got to a point where Ocon moved ahead and was able to put a few really, really stunning overtakes on people. I think getting past Alex Albon was the key because, Albon was very, very quick in a straight line. but really, really struggled in Sector 2 in particular. And Gasly really struggled because he was on the same medium tyres that Albon was on, and struggled in that kind of after his own pit stop to make the pass on Albon. Ocon was able to do that. He was able to get past Gasly, put the move on Albon on the soft tyres, then kind of forge ahead and make something of his race. And that move that he put on Tsunoda at Les Combes, kind of around the outside and then folding onto the inside, that was stunning. That was really, really brave. It was just two drivers that, kind of respect each other and have faith in each other, and were able, he was able to get that move done. And then got after Lance Stroll. Afterwards, Stroll at that point was lifting and coasting. Whether that was to save fuel or whether there was another issue, we don't quite know. But it was a really strong result from Ocon, and qualifying hadn't gone particularly well for Alpine, and to get back in the mix, 3rd and 8th, as you say, it's a really, really strong result for the team, because I think managerial changes, there have been so many over the last couple of years. I think in the last decade, that Enstone team has gone through, I think, 6 people that have assumed the team principal role, which is, it's quite a lot. Bruno Firmin will be taking over from Omar Safnauer for the rest of the season. It's expected to be a kind of stopgap measure. Firmin has come from the Renault powertrain side. He took over as CEO, put in between, Rossi and Safnauer, and then Rossi was moved aside. So he'll be in charge for the foreseeable future. Who they get in for 2024, I think some people are predicting a certain bespectacled Italian to come into the team. I'm sure there are other options available. So, we wait with bated breath to see who's the next person through the Alpine revolving door.
Well, if we're sticking with the football example, ex-players, I'd love to see an ex-driver showing up. I think Vettel would make a great manager. Maybe not now, but sometime in the future. He's enjoying his retirement for now and jumping in the odd car. And let's talk a little bit about the winners, though. Max Verstappen. I had a bit of a wager with one of our colleagues, Sam, on the Autosport podcast. He thought it was going to be 5 laps to get into the lead. I said 4. Well, Max had a little doze for 17 laps before he took the lead. When he did, it was a second quicker a lap than his teammate. So much quicker than the other car. Dominant. Tecci on the radio. GP his engineer. They're like a married couple bickering. He was saying, Max, don't take life out of your new tyres now. I can see what you're doing, as Max put in another fastest lap. Or a better example, me telling my toddler not to spill his drink as he looks me in the eye and goes, "Oh, what's that, Daddy? Oh, it's a bit of a mess here." And so it's just great. We love to see it, right? But maybe they're doing it on purpose to keep us all interested. Max is going to go away knowing that he can wrap this championship up pretty quickly. But again, a dominant performance today, Matt.
Yeah, I think he's lost his edge, hasn't he? It took him 17 laps this year to get from 6th to 1st. Last year it was 12 laps from 14th to 1st. So yeah, I think his peaks is coming up. No, another sensational performance. There was pictures going around of the tyres he used yesterday, today, and how much cleaner they are than everyone else's after a similar sort of stint. And that's been Perez's bread and butter, managing the rubber, and Verstappen is even further ahead than there. It was, absolute cockiness, wasn't it, to go, let's have some pit stop practice, guys, and try and go for fastest lap. And, GP coming back and said, mate, what are you doing? These tyres are all about how you lean into them, how you build them. You don't throw surprises at them. And then he was nailing fastest sectors and taking a life out of them. So, a bit of friction there. The greater narrative of if it was ever Perez versus Verstappen or whatever, Verstappen is someone who is so critical to that team. There's limits on how much you can control him, reining him in certain scenarios, but all of it is excusable when there is nothing to go wrong. Bigger team picture as well. They actually had, for a race, they had Perez there to play rear gunner if one of these rogue downshift issues he's been unhappy with at the start of the season ever was to manifest itself. But again, another stonking winning margin over Perez. Sort of different gravy as I look out, and it's absolutely heaving it down now. Where is this to spice up the race and give Max Verstappen something to worry about? But yeah, he's just completely untouchable, and I'm almost getting to that point in the season where a perverse part of me wants him and Red Bull to win everything now, just to say, yeah, I was there when they did it. But it's just like that car, so read it on Autosport over the summer break, but we've been speaking to some of the Red Bull engineers for interviews, and a bit like with copying of the McLaren rear wing, they're just looking at the rest of the pit lane and going, this car is not a Lotus 72 style game changer. It's not a Ferrari F2004 in terms of the peak performance is so high. It's a very strong car, not revolutionary. It's got a massive operating window, and those credentials are enough. It's a jack of all trades, master of none, essentially. And the other teams can't even keep pace with that. So that's where we're at now. And you put Verstappen in it, and he is, well ahead.
Yeah, it's just, there's so many tiny details that the team have got so well, done so well. I was watching the onboards today, and he was coming up behind drivers to overtake. And as they're already in top gear, he's then shifting up a gear. And it's even like the gear ratios, which are set before the season now. It's not that they're doing it from race to race. Even tiny details like that, they've managed to just get the gear set up to be perfect with that car, that package, that engine for the whole season. And it just works everywhere. It's so massively impressive. Let's finish off, JBL, by talking about the summer break. When we come back, we'll be heading to Zandvoort, home race for Max to go and give a real treat to his fans. But it'll be everybody else's work that we'll be focusing on, I think, with the factory shutdowns and then the second half of the season and what development can take place. What are you going to be looking out for?
Well, I think it's, first of all, everybody's got to have a bit of a relax. And, it's been a grueling opening of the season, very, very long, a bit chastening for the teams that we're hoping to get after Red Bull. So it'll be interesting to see what the rest of them have got in their locker, if they're able to, put together anything that they might have in the pipeline that could theoretically do anything to beat Red Bull. Because at this moment in time, it's a little bit like 1988 when the MP44 was so dominant. It needed force majeure, really, in the shape of Jean-Louis Schlesser to take Ayrton Senna out of it. And that was only made possible because Nigel Mansell was ill. It is hard to see where the next challenge will come from. We are going to be on the lookout for all kinds of updates because, Zandvoort will be the first place where the fruit of the last little bits of any work over the summer come to pass. Monza, then it'll be Monza spec upgrades and that kind of things. That'll be hugely interesting. And then we'll be into seeing how the teams manage the flyaways because, again, it's a completely different set of tracks. Singapore will be, again, quite grueling because of, different time zone, different kind of track, very, very hot, very, very humid. Weather could play a role there. And then Suzuka as well, true driver's circuit as well. So a lot can still happen, I think. There's 10 races still left. Doesn't feel like it, but there are. And, there's so much that could still happen in those 10 races.
JBL, you summed that up beautifully, but of course it was Ayrton Senna's fault in that race.
Come on, let's not end with an argument. Let's go away nicely as we finish off. That's the first half of our season done. We'd love to hear from you in the comments below what you thought about this weekend's double win for Max Verstappen. Red Bull absolutely dominant. Surely they've just shut down development of this year, working on next year already. It's got to be happening. But what do you think about what you saw further down the pack as well on the grid? We'd love to hear from you in the comments below, and we love to read your comments and the discussion. Thank you so much for watching. Give us a thumbs up if you like the video and subscribe to the channel so you get more just like it. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you on the next one.